Hello and welcome to Curated Spaces. I'm Molly Cooper and this is the London edition. In our first ever mini-season, we'll be featuring the best spaces to stay, work and play around the city, from timeless icons to under-the-radar finds. And as well as sitting down with the teams who brought them to life, I'll be bringing you the inside scoop from some pretty amazing people getting up to some pretty great things within travel, design and hospitality. I'm so excited to share all their stories with you, so let's get into it, shall we?
Today I'm at the Conduit, a members club in the heart of London whose community is committed to creating a just, prosperous and sustainable future. And I'm delighted to welcome Paul Van Zyl to the podcast. Having grown up in South Africa during the apartheid era, he served as the Executive Secretary in South Africa's Post-Apartheid Truth and Reconciliation Commission before co-founding the Conduit in 2016. Paul, I'm so excited to hear all about this wonderful space and brilliant community. Welcome to the podcast. How are you doing today?
I'm doing excellent. Thank you so much for having me.
Not at all. It's such a pleasure to be here, right in the heart of London, in Covent Garden, looking out over those rooftops and chimneys. And we're in this warm, African-inspired space, it feels like. It's such a hidden gem here in the heart of London. But before we hear about it, I'd love to hear a bit about you and your background and how you've ended up here at the Conduit.
I'm a human rights lawyer by training.
Yeah.
I was very active in the anti-apartheid movement. I cut my teeth in South Africa in the 1980s when our country was a racist regime that denied people their fundamental human rights, and had the great fortune of witnessing a country go from apartheid to democracy and from conflict to relative peace. And also had the enormous I also had the enormous privilege of working with Nelson Mandela and Desmond Tutu.
Wow.
Two absolutely giant figures of the 20th century, and both of whom taught me an enormous amount, both about leadership, but also about optimism, that it's always darkest before dawn, and that some of the world's most difficult problems are actually solutions waiting to be uncovered. And so I think what the Conduit emerged from was a sense of both a fight against injustice, but also a sense that positive solutions are possible. And that's what we try and do here every day.
Yeah, I think that's such a powerful message, and I can't wait to go into that into more detail. But before we do, could we just paint a little picture about where we are in the world for people who maybe haven't been to the Conduit or aren't familiar with this pocket of London?
So we're in the heart of Covent Garden. We're just we're in Langley Street, which is a wonderful pedestrian street just off Longacre, about a minute from the Covent Garden Tube, for any of those people who are London aficionados. And we are in a 25,000 square foot building. It has 6 floors, one of the largest roof terraces in Covent Garden, and a wonderful restaurant on the roof. And then a whole series of floors where our members gather, event spaces, places where people can come and meet and talk, can pitch their businesses. Particularly, we have a whole arm called Conduit Connect, which is an arm that raises capital for startup businesses that have double bottom lines, that are committed to both profit and to purpose. That arm has raised about £25 million into those companies, and those companies have gone on to raise over £600 million. So it's beginning to prove out a theory of change and show some scale. The key thing we do at the Conduit is we do about 150 talks a year. Last year, 450 speakers there or thereabouts came to those events, and over 10,000 people were in attendance. And about 100,000 people walked through the doors. And so it's a place where people who are passionate about positive social change are members, come and attend events, and try and think in a clear-eyed way about all the many, many challenges the world is currently facing, and there are many. But on the flip side of that, to say, how do we address them? How do we try and forge solutions out of these very adverse circumstances?
And I love that. I love that you've taken this huge, all these issues that are facing the planet, societies, and you've put that as your core identity. It's not people who are in the arts or people who like this or it's people who are passionate about making change and doing better for the planet we live in, which I think is amazing. I'd love to hear a bit about how you came to the decision to make the space, to take that dive into the deep end and open up a members club. I believe that wasn't your background. So how was that process for you?
The kind of the line between a life of being a human rights lawyer, I then became the executive secretary of South Africa's Truth Commission and worked alongside Desmond Tutu and, uncovering the crimes that occurred under apartheid and giving victims a voice and letting their stories be told and their suffering be acknowledged. And then I founded what became a rather large not-for-profit organization, worked in 30 countries around the world, largely working with heads of state on how you manage transitions from conflict to peace or from authoritarian to more democratic rule. And then I had a year where I was chosen as a young global leader at the World Economic Forum. I won the Skoll Award for Social Entrepreneurship. I spoke at TED. And I suddenly found myself in a world of people who were entrepreneurs and who were using business to try and address some of these challenges. And my eyes really opened up to that. And partly because I'd run a not-for-profit. Not-for-profits take philanthropic donations. Philanthropy is, a tiny fraction, less than 1% of the world's economy. And so I became convinced that if you wanted to achieve solutions at scale and in a speedy way, you'd need to be on the other side of the capital equation and harness the great force and power of business in order to kind of address change. That's not to say that not-for-profits are not vital, that government is not crucial, that citizen movements and activism are not important. Indeed, without those three things, I don't think the private sector will on its own do the right thing. It's just that the private sector properly aligned can do things that nothing else can. And so with my co-founder, we set it up. And the idea really was to build a club, but not to make it one of those kind of stuffy, exclusive, elitist, old boy ties clubs, or not a club that's kind of too cool for school, although I think cool is great, but really a community where people share, are reciprocal, think about how they can support each other, and then are positive minded. So you can have a great cocktail, you can have a wonderful meal, you can meet somebody who you can fall in love with, but you're also there to try and tackle problems.
Oh, have you had any Conduit romances then?
Yes. We have people who have met and got married at the Conduit. Some of our very first members, met at a refugee dinner, had never met before, and a couple went on and got married. And so there've been loads of instances, because it stands to reason. If you care about the world, it attracts a group of people who are going to have things in common.
Definitely. And I think as soon as you walk in, you feel this buzz. There's a real energy, and on every floor we went to, it was buzzing. There were some people working, some people drinking, having a coffee, but everywhere had that sort of very positive, upbeat buzz, I'd say, to it, which I think is amazing and is really testament to the community you're building here. And how have you seen that community grow and develop, I guess? You had this idea, you've now seen it come to life, and have you seen members come and make use of this space in a way that maybe you hadn't anticipated? Or
Well, I think it's interesting because the membership comprises such a different heterogeneous group of people. You have activists, you have entrepreneurs, you have CEOs from small startup businesses, CEOs from giant FTSE listed businesses. You have the presidents of the world's biggest foundations. You have, former heads of states. You have heads of state, and then you have students from the London School of Economics, and you have people who are musicians. And so it's a very broad group of people united by this idea of trying to address the world's big challenges. And that's been encouraging, because in a world which is challenged and besieged, where things seem, if you read the news, to be getting harder, not easier, where great power conflict has reemerged, where the climate catastrophe is upon us, where inequality and an absence of opportunity and mobility seem to be more persistent rather than less, you could very easily say, the world is in a very hard, challenging place, and we should either just be, all for ourselves, or we should give up and become hopeless. And then the flip side of that is, if you were to pick a moment in history where technology is achieving completely exponential breakthroughs, from artificial intelligence to genomics to material science to energy storage. The world is just completely transforming in front of our eyes. Things that we never thought were possible are happening in the blink of an eye. So you have a great secular positive force of technological innovation. You have capital, which is seeking not just returns, but also impacts. And so there's money to fund this. You have a great entrepreneurial movement and moment, partly spurred on by COVID, but also by a sense that people don't necessarily want to go and work in a big corporation. They want to found things and do things on their own. You have citizen movements. So, everybody from Extinction Rebellion to the Sunrise Movement to Black Lives Matter to a group of people who are just mobilizing and trying to shake us out of a sense of complacency. And you have whole new industries being invented that previously didn't exist. I mean, if you were to say to me 10 years ago that wind power was going to be $1 trillion industry, or battery storage was going to be $1 trillion industry, or green hydrogen was going to be completely transformative, I would have said, well, what are those things? And now those things are just features of our life. And so I think what we're trying to do at the Conduit is balance the adversity against the opportunity and tilt history in favor of the opportunity and away from the adversity.
I think that's just such an amazing mission for the space, but also this community you're building to give people this platform to come and use, and people like themselves to come and go through that shared journey with. I think that's incredible. And I'd love to hear about the venture capital arm that you sort of mentioned in the beginning, and how that came about and what that's looking like today.
The Conduit Connect, our sister company, came about in parts, like all good ideas, organically, spontaneously, and from others. And really because members started saying, well, we've joined this community. And by the way, I have the startup. And I went to the bar and met somebody who was an investor, and they invested 25,000 or 100,000 or 200,000 pounds in my company. And they just kept happening. And so we said, well, rather than it be spontaneous and disorganized, we should try and structure that serendipity in such a way that people are able to pitch, we're able to vet those companies, we're able to truly authenticate that they're not greenwashers, that they're actually trying to do, that they're actually doing what they say they're doing. And so that emerged, and it's the throughput through that company has been quite amazing. Very ably led by a wonderful CEO, and the level of energy that it creates, and also the sense that it's not just capital that it takes to build a business. It's capital plus. You need contacts, you need supply chains, you need board members, you need skilled colleagues, you need good luck. You need introductions. So if you build a business in the heart of a community, you're more likely to have the tools and the resources and the networks to succeed than if you just do it on your own.
Absolutely. And I love how that kind of plays into, like you said earlier, the old elitist gentlemen's clubs where deals were done behind closed doors. And you actually sort of turn that on its head, and you've now opened up this whole idea of having a community and a network and support system to anyone who's got these shared goals and values. And I think that's really brilliant. Yeah.
I mean, if you take old elitist gentlemen's club deal behind closed doors and you say it is new, egalitarian, gender equal club in which people do deals through a network and out in the open, that's quite exciting.
Yes.
And that's something that you want to be part of.
Definitely. And I think you've really hit this sort of growing trend. Like you said, everyone these days, graduates don't want to join big companies. They want to join startups. They want to become sustainability consultants. They want to really find jobs that give them purpose and give back to the world. And actually, it's amazing this space is doing exactly that in a landscape of a lot of spaces where maybe you come together around food or around interiors, which is great. You've really found this niche for yourselves here, which is this huge macro trend of doing better, doing more, finding purpose. I think that's really amazing.
I think it's partly responsive to something that's happening in the real world, right? Yeah. So I think every year from now until the future, you're going to have more people working in sustainable hospitality, ethical fashion, new forms of food, new forms of power generation, new approaches to racial and gender equity. And that's not, I don't want to come across as either self-righteous or holier than thou or kind of the woke squad, because not that I have objections to any of that, but it's more that I think what we're trying to do is not point fingers or sit in a position of judgment. It's more actually saying we're all trying to figure this out, and how do you build a society that is more sustainable, that is fairer, but where people have to work hard and take responsibility and do their fair share and contribute towards other people and are givers as much as they are takers. And I think all of that language and all of that approach is inclusive. And it's not left or right, it's I think what it is trying to be clear-eyed about trying to make things better, and better, grows a pie, makes for a more interesting society.
Definitely.
And also I think optimism is infectious.
Yes, you're so right. Well, whatever it is, it's infectious here. You can feel it as soon as you walk through those doors. And another thing I think is so clever, as we were walking around, you pointed out those beautiful tiles in the rooftop restaurant, which you said were all painted by craftsmen in Africa. You have those hand-woven baskets. And I love that you've really gone to find these like local producers and makers and celebrating them here in the space and promoting that craft. So I'd love to hear a bit about that journey and how you sort of brought the space itself to life.
Well, if you're going to build out a space and if you're going to develop a club, it starts with a piece of real estate. That real estate that you find and you sign a lease on or you acquire is never going to have the design of that you want from day one. And so you have, pounds or dollars or Norwegian kroner to allocate to making a place beautiful and creating an environment that is biophilic and conducive and beautiful and uplifting. And then you can spend it on, your local suppliers, no problem with that in principle, or you can allocate your procurement dollars or pounds or krona to artisans in the global south who have incredible skills, who produce things of enormous beauty, but for whom though that additional purchasing power is transformative and so much more valuable for them than it is for a person just down the road in a relatively wealthy and stable country. So you're right, our tiles are hand painted by artisans in South Africa. Our baskets and our tapestries in the podcast room we're sitting in are these beautiful hand-woven tapestries. They come from Swaziland. We have all of the plants in our club tended to and maintained by a really wonderful NGO called Glasshouse, which supports women who are on day release, who have been incarcerated and are integrating back into society. And it's a sort of program to give them a pathway back. And so it gives them the dignity of work. And so our plants have a kind of social enterprise backing to them. Yeah. And if you think about it, it's we're not doing anything particularly genius. It's common sense. And it gives us joy to do it and gives our members joy to feel as though they're surrounded by objects that have a story. Yes. That aren't just an object.
Yeah, I love the idea of joy. You walk around, there's colours everywhere, real sort of textural tapestries, those big the woven knot dangling things. I don't know what you'd call that.
They're ropes. They're
yeah.
woven rope. But you're absolutely true. The ropes that are woven, those are also woven out of grass by Swazi women, and I think they're just beautiful.
Yeah.
And you could put up a bunch of linoleum dividers between space A and space B, or you could do those beautiful things and drape the space, and they look beautiful and they have a story.
Exactly. And everywhere you look, you feel like there's a little bit of history or a little fragment of a story just waiting to be sort of discovered. And like you have the reading room as well that you said, and actual paperback books and hardback books in 2024. I can't believe it's 2024. And it's just amazing. It was warmth and joy come together in one space. I think that's really quite special. And then, of course, you go up to the top floor and suddenly you're in Scandiland and there's silver birch trees. How did you come to that fusion of Africa meets sort of Norway, Sweden? Or was that very natural to you from the beginning?
Well, that decision was made in part because our second club is open in Oslo. And so we decided to kit out our rooftop pergola for Christmas. And we decided to sort of choose a scandi aesthetic, in part because there's a wonderful tradition, which I'm sure you're aware of, but every year the Norwegians take one of the largest Christmas trees in the world and bring it from Norway, and they light it up in Trafalgar Square as a thank you from the city of Oslo to the city of London, and from the people of Norway to the people of the United Kingdom, for the role that the UK played in supporting Norway during World War II. So you have this wonderful story of Christmas tree solidarity. And then the mayor of Oslo came to London, and we have a club in Oslo and a club in London. So we hosted her and a delegation of Norwegians, and we took them up to our rooftop and recreated a bit of Scandinavia on our roof. So it had a sort of story to it. I happen to like the Scandinavian aesthetic. I mean, I'm an African, so I prefer the African aesthetic. But I think the fusion of these different worlds can produce things that are both surprising and elegant if done well.
I kind of love it how it sort of mimics this club, bringing together people from all walks of life, whatever their backgrounds, but coming together and sort of complementing each other. I think that's amazing. And tell me more about this new club of yours then, Oslo. How come Oslo? How come Norway? And what's that been looking like so far?
We decided to establish the second Conduit in Oslo, first of all, because the Norwegians kept asking. And secondly, because I suspect they kept asking because Norway has many of the characteristics, both in its people and in its country, that mimic what we're trying to achieve in the Conduit. Norway is the home of the Nobel Peace Prize. I worked with two Peace Prize winners, Nelson Mandela and Desmond Tutu. And so it has a long tradition of celebrating peacemakers, its work in conflict resolution around the world. Norway is a home of the world's largest sovereign wealth fund, owns 2% of every stock market in the world, a couple $1 trillion. They took their natural, their gas and their oil, and put the proceeds into a fund for future generations, as opposed to frittering it away. And therefore, they have unusual influence on the world if you can use that financial muscle to tilt people towards positive impact. They are a country which is a startup nation, and where there's innovation and a great interest in tech. They have a reflexive commitment towards sustainability, even if they are a natural gas nation. And Norwegians have the Scandinavian equivalent of Ubuntu, which is they have a sense of the highest levels of trust in the world between each other, and they have a sense that they owe their fellow citizens an obligation. And so all of those characteristics make for fertile ground for a Conduit. And then we have incredible partners in the form of Catapult, which is a fund, a VC fund committed to social impact out of Oslo, and incredible landlords, and strong links in with the Norwegian government in the form of Mayor of Oslo and other people. So we've had good luck, a good network, and good reason to be there.
Excellent. And are you getting many trips to Norway in these days? Or?
Many trips, and it's 2 hours. Right now it's minus 24 degrees centigrade. So I think I might wait a little till my next trip. In fact, some our team members were there just yesterday and came back with some stories to tell about what it's like to be out in minus 24 degrees centigrade. But then during the summer, it's broad daylight, 24 hours a day, and idyllic. So
lovely. Well, it's a nice spot of the world you've got yourself there for your second club.
It's a pretty country.
Very well chosen.
It's a pretty country.
And then tell me more about this sort of global community you're building as well. I know you have the online learning modules. Yeah. I'd love to hear a bit about that and how you're sort of welcoming people all over the world into the Conduit.
Yeah. So we've just launched something called the Conduit Digital Academy. And what it's trying to do is take the 150 talks or so a year that we do out of London and soon another 150 out of Oslo and package up that remarkable content articulated by very senior and thoughtful experts and policymakers and change makers into a more structured learning environment. So our first module is on how to get to net zero and to try and break down a very jargony idea of what net zero is into something that is intelligible for people so that you or me or our grandmother or grandfather or sister or daughter or son can actually know what that means. Mm-hmm. So, if we need to reduce our carbon emissions by 2050 to net zero, that is the carbon emissions that we put into the world being radically reduced and then enhancing those endeavors that draw down carbon so that the carbon being emitted is offset by the carbon being drawn down and you achieve net zero, then that's a concept we can all understand. And then you say, well, how are you going to go about doing that? What emissions do you need to reduce in transport and in power and in food consumption? And how do you avoid deforestation? And what are you going to have to do with methane? And how are we going to harness the powers of material science and molecular biology to get there? And then have experts who have done it tell you how they've done it. And so you can learn about it in a more structured way. So we're going to do 4 or 5 of these courses a year and really give people toolkits to engage in a more expert and thoughtful way about positive change. And then we're going to, alongside that, launch a series of high-profile conferences with the world's biggest media brands, so either the New York Times or the Financial Times or The Guardian, and talk about a couple of kind of key topics where we gather a couple hundred people, up to 1,000 people. And our first one is going to be on refugee settlement and integration. Wow. A really difficult and thorny problem, but one that I think there really are fantastic opportunities to take refugees from whipping boys and girls to the real assets that they are and find ways of making them both welcome and productive assets in societies that they arrive. And next conference will be on climate and AI, how to harness the power of artificial intelligence to accelerate climate solutions, a conference on green jobs, because I think, the world needs more jobs and we need more climate solutions. And how do you marry those two endeavors? And then finally, a conference on how you finance the green transition. So if you're going to go about changing the nature of our society so it's more sustainable and more green, you have to bring money to bear. And where you're going to get that money and from what sources and how do you harness it in a thoughtful and sustainable way. Well,
you've got a busy year, well, few years by the sounds of it ahead.
Exactly. Like nothing going on.
No, nothing going on. Work-life balance. Oh, it's been such a pleasure chatting. Before we do go, I do have a closing tradition where I have 3 questions for you. Imagine you've cashed that winning Euro Millions check, so money is of no object. And I'd love to know, what space are you running away to disconnect and to detox?
Wow. I recently went to Japan, and I've been to over 100 countries in the world, many of which are places where there's been terrible conflict and a lot of hardship. So Japan is this rare place where there's tremendous tranquility and enormous wealth and thousands of years of tradition. There was also an earthquake while I was there, so that gave a little bit of a fresh on of excitement. But what I liked about Japan is that it's a place where they have the kind of organization of the Swiss, but they are also bohemian. They have an incredible food culture. They have a fashion culture. They have an underground culture. They're able to be wildly structured, and they're also able to be wildly wild.
Yes.
And I think, and then they have a great attention to detail, to aesthetics. Their gardens are beautiful. They've got almost more Michelin stars per capita than any other place in the world because they are attentive to, they sweat the small things.
Yeah.
And so I think that it makes for it's definitely not a perfect society. I'm not being Panglossian about Japan, but they have many things to recommend them. And I found myself in admiration of the place and the people.
Yeah. I love that. A lot of people say Japan, actually. I feel like there's a real sort of fascination or admiration for people of that culture, like you say, the tranquility, the history, their sort of approach to life. It's so polite and respectful. And excellent answer. Next one, slightly different. Your ultimate birthday party. Where are you hosting it?
I think I might host it on a small island, many layers down the Indonesian archipelago. Many years ago, I went to such an island that you could kind of walk around in an hour around the full perimeter, and they had a really quite remarkable hotel. And what I liked about it was that it was physically stunning. The hotel was designed beautifully, and it was sufficiently disconnected from the world that you felt as though you could think and act freely. And so I would probably assemble, a couple hundred really interesting people from lots of different walks of life and have dinner parties and meals and music and dancing and, a good combination of things in a place that nobody could leave, so that you created a bit of a kind of hothouse effect for a couple of days.
I love it. You're making your own commune for a few days.
Exactly.
Excellent.
Exactly.
And then finally, this might be a bit tricky if you've already seen 100 countries, but your bucket list trip, once in a lifetime, where are you heading, and are you staying anywhere special?
So I'm sort of ticking off in my mind the places that I've been. And the places that I'd still like to go, and I think that I would probably land up spending some time in Mexico, and the reason why I would do that is because I think it's a country that gets a really bad reputation. Has a bad reputation, and it's viewed as either a sort of unwelcome source of migrants into the United States, or a place where you have mass killings or drugs or violence or dysfunction. And I think if you dig beneath that, it's a place that has really performed extraordinarily well in the last decade. It has an enormous entrepreneurial class, a group of wildly sophisticated and thoughtful people. It has almost limitless natural beauty. It has a very interesting and rich cuisine. It has very, very varied natural environment. And I think if you list places that you'd like to visit, they need a number of things in aggregate that would attract you to them. And I mean, to be honest, I could give you a dozen such places on my list, but Mexico would be one of them.
Well, I just saw a friend last night who just got back from Mexico and is obsessed with all things Aztec and Mexicans. So I think that's an excellent choice to end on. She'll be delighted to hear that. Thank you so much for coming on the podcast, Paul. It's been such a pleasure chatting with you.
Thank you so much. It's been delightful, and good luck with everything, and may your listenership grow, and I hope this goes from strength to strength.
Thank you, Paul.
Wow, Paul, what a man, what a life, and what an incredible space. Really just amazing to see how places like this can just do so much good for the world. And I'm super excited to see what lays ahead for the Conduit. I hope you enjoyed this conversation. And if you did, please, as ever, go on and make my day by leaving a little review or hitting that subscribe button. There are so many things I'd love to do with Curated Spaces this year, and that just helps make all of it possible. You can also head to our website for loads more content and also some inspiration for your next trip away. So go get planning your next vacation, and I'll see you next time for more of the London edition.